Welcome back to another video. Today we're doing another Christmas card. I'm using the same cards that I used in the last video, so I will go ahead and link these down below. And I'm also using the same paints. I decided for these Christmas cards, I'm just going to stick with these three colors to kind of challenge ourselves. So I've got my Cadmium Yellow from M-Gram Pyrroll Red, and then my Cotman Prussian Blue. I've got a jar for clean water, a jar for dirty water, a paper towel off to the side. I've got a few different brushes here. So I've got this mop brush that I'm going to use to lay some water down for this background area here because I kind of want this to be wet and wet. I've got a size 8 brush that I'm going to use for most of this, and then I've got a size 6 or a size 2 if I need a very small brush to come in for these little tiny coal pieces here. So we'll just see. Use whatever brushes that you have though. I've also got this Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. I'm going to use this maybe two different ways. I'm not sure if I want to add some snow onto the top hat here, but I do want to add maybe some snow or some texture into the background. So usually I'm trying to get a smooth wash and a smooth blend, but I think I want this to be a little bit more textured. So if we end up getting some blooms or some stuff going on, that's kind of what I'm going for. Now, what I actually did was trace this out on some tracing paper. So I just put tracing paper over this, traced this edge out. Then I used transfer paper to transfer it onto just a blank piece of paper. And I made a cutout so that when we do, if this paper gives me enough time, I want to come in with this and just kind of splash this into the background to kind of make like a snowy effect into the background, but this will protect our subject. Now, if you don't want to do this step, you could use masking fluid to mask out your subject, or you could just splash it on and then come in with a paper towel real quick and just dab that up. It's not going to hurt anything, but I think that's all of the supplies that I'm using today. I did go ahead and tape all of the borders here because I want borders all the way around. And yeah, so I think we're ready to get started. And if you're liking these real-time videos and you want to follow along with more real-time videos from me, I will go ahead and link my Patreon down below. That's where all of my tutorials are real-time and you paint with me or draw with me, whatever medium I'm using. But let's just jump right in, and I'm going to put some of this P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White right onto my palette so it'll be ready to go. I'm just going to use my size 6 brush here, and I'm going to get some of this down. Just get a little pile of it here. Doesn't have to be a whole lot because we won't need a whole lot for the background. I'm going to wipe most of that off onto my paper towel, and then I'm just coming in and dipping some water into this because I don't want it to be super opaque. I want it to be a little watered down to give us that nice like soft effect in the background. And we'll see if this is going to work out. If you're using 100% cotton paper, you're going to have a lot more time to play around in the background, but because these are not as great paper, I'm doing my best to be able to still have some time to play around in some of these areas. And I have to say the cards are still coming out quite nice. So this paper is definitely not my favorite, but it's not the worst that I've tried. I think this is slightly better than the Strathmore watercolor cards that I usually use. So I do think this is maybe a tiny step up from those. Again, if you did want to just do your painting on regular watercolor paper, you could still glue it onto one of these cards. And then you still have the card backing, but you have your painting on some good paper. So that's also an option. So let's go ahead and mix up some blue for the background. Now I want sort of like a stormy blue. So I'm going to do the same thing that we've been doing with our blue. We're going to get some blue down and mix some of our red and a touch of yellow into it. And I'm going to mix up my color before I come in the water to put water on the paper, just so I have the most amount of time to play around with these paints. And again, I don't need a whole lot of this color down because it's not a very big background. I'm going to grab just a touch of my red to turn it a little bit more purpley. Just a hint. And then we'll rinse that off and we'll grab our yellow. So if you're wanting to mix your three primary colors like this and you want to do complementary colors, so I want to tone this down. Right now it's still very vibrant, but if I add the complement to this, because it's more of a purpley blue, since I've used blue and red, the complement to purple would be yellow. So it's easier to start working one mix instead of putting a little bit of yellow, a little bit of red, a little bit of blue. I kind of start with one mix, so I'll either make a purple or I'll make a green, and then I mix the other color into it, or an orange, and then I'll mix a little bit of blue into it. It's a little easier to control that way. So just a touch of yellow, and you can see how this is just going to start to gray it up a little bit. And the more yellow that you add, oh, it's going to go towards a black, but I want to keep it more on the blue side, a little bit of like a gray blue, and that's pretty good for me. So let me just show you what this looks like. So this is a black that I mixed up with these colors, and you can see that this is still definitely on the blue side, just dark and kind of like a dark stormy blue. I really like that. So I'm going to save this brush because we're just going to go right in with that. And I'm going into my clean water now. And actually, before we do that, let's just take a kneaded eraser or whatever eraser you have, and I'm just going to lighten this area right where I'm going to be painting, just a tiny bit, just so that we don't have a harsh line. Now, you don't have to do this. If you want to keep your graphite lines a little bit bolder, you can definitely leave them on the paper. Sometimes I like that look, and then sometimes I want some softer edges. I say softer edges, but I mean softer, like graphite lines. This is still going to be a harsh edge while we're painting. Okay, so let's just grab some water, clean brush, clean water, and I'm going to go right along the edges here. And I do want to take my time to go around my subject. Now, if I go over the hat, because that's going to be a very dark area, that's not a big deal. But on the face and the nose, I want to make sure I'm coming around these areas to preserve, especially for the nose, because we want that to be a nice bright orange. And then we'll throw in some blue for some shadows. And we definitely have highlights here for the skin, so I want to make sure I'm keeping those in. And I'm using a little bit more water than I normally would, just because these cards are tending to dry very, very fast. So I want to give myself as much time as possible to get this paint in. And if your card dries faster than you're able to get onto the white area, that's totally fine. Let it dry completely and then just re-wet it, and then just do the white part if you want to add that in. So you could do it in multiple steps. It doesn't have to be done all in one step. But if you are using good paper, then you'll usually have enough time to do it. So I'm coming over every area a couple of times. Really want to make sure everything's nice and wet. And the more time you take to wet your paper, the more time you'll have to work on it. Even if you're using 100% cotton paper, you really want to wet it and give it time for the water to kind of sink in. Now this paper doesn't really allow the water to sink in, but that's what you want for a good cotton paper. You want it to sink in, and then you add a little bit more water, and then that's what gives you so much time, because the paper is going to stay wet for a much longer amount of time. All right, so I think I'm just about ready to get painting. Now I don't want to have puddles, so I will come along the edge and just soak up any water that's along the edges there. And we're going to come right in with our dark color. I'm going to add some water to this, because the more water I have, it will still add water to the paper, and then that'll give us more time to play with everything. So I don't have to cover the whole paper perfectly. I'm going to leave a little bit of spaces and kind of just let the paint do its thing. But as I get down further, I'm going to add a little bit of water to my brush because I can kind of see a lighter area here. And then I'm going to start getting this in and just leaving some spaces. And then this is where I come back and I kind of clean up any edges. And I'm just dabbing that brush off if I have too much water on it. I might add just a little bit more dark color up here. And I'm trying to make it a little uneven because I do want some texture in here. Okay, and it's starting to dry. So I'm going to rinse this brush out really well. And I'm just going to set it off to the side. Actually, I'm going to use this because I'm going to do the tapping method. And I always start with a little bit less. So I'm going to get this on my brush. I'm going to tap it off onto my paper towel. And I'm just going to start tapping this onto my paper. And actually, I definitely need more water for this to flow. So I want to get, there we go. I want to get some splotches. Oh yeah, and I forgot to use my little cutout. So I'm just going to plop this right down. Doesn't have to be perfect. And I'm just adding water to this. And I just want to get a few little splotches. And I'm even just dipping my brush right in the water because I want to get that like bloomy kind of look going on here. I'm really going to get some water on my brush. And I'm just going to get a few, especially down here. I feel like that's pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and let that dry. Now I would let this air dry. Actually, I want to suck up this dark puddle just right here. I would let this air dry just so that it has time to kind of move and manipulate, and that's what's going to kind of spread it out a little bit and soften it. But be careful because doing this technique, I've definitely got little white spots all over my desk here. So this is a good time to go in and clean that up. And if you've got any on your snowman, go ahead and clean that up. And this would also be a good time to come in and if we want to fix any areas. Now this is still really wet around the nose, so I'm not going to come in and scrub, but I can just come in and just gently lift some paint away. But once it dries a little bit more, we can come in and scrub some of that paint out of there. But I don't want to have this weird little harsh edge here, so I'm just going to pull some paint back around the nose, and then we can come in afterwards and fix that. So I'm going to go ahead and let this dry, and we will be right back. Okay, so now that this is dry, you can kind of see the pretty, like swirly little like textures that we get in the background. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to try to scrub out a little bit in the nose. So I want to make sure my brush is clean. Now the red that we are using is very staining. So sometimes you can't always, depending how much you've used, we're not going to be able to scrub it out completely, especially since I've let everything dry. That's okay because we're we're going to come over with some orange. So if we need to make it a little bit darker, we totally can do that. You know what? Let me grab actually a scrubber brush, because if you're using a soft brush like that, you're definitely not going to be able to scrub as much. But using a cheaper paper that's not 100% cotton, you're not going to be able to scrub very much. But a scrubber brush is just a very stiff brush that will really get in there and get the paint out. So I just tend to dip it in water. I dab it off onto my paper towel, and then we can come in and scrub away. But you do want to be careful, because this can ruin the paper very easily. So you just want to just very lightly rub against the paper. And I can see it might be starting to kind of rip that up. So that's good enough for me. You could do a little bit more if you like. If you want to come into any other areas, like we could come here. And if it's not doing anything, you need to add a little bit of water to it. And we can just come along here. But again, these don't have to be perfect. These are just fun little watercolor cards. But I kind of want to show you some different techniques that you can do along the way as well, in case you do make any of these. I don't really call them mistakes. You know, there's no mistakes in art. They're just little oopsies. And even then, like, it might be really cool to like leave this edge. Like that could be maybe a little bit of snow or something that's on him. But that's all I'm going to do. So you kind of get the idea if you want to, you know, take this technique and use it to fix another painting. But let's go ahead and let's maybe start on his like little snowman skin. Since we've got this blue mixed up, I think I'm just going to use a watered down version of that. And then we've got to make sure it's pretty dark up here around the hat. And I may come in and drop a little bit of red down here, just so we're like, I think I'm going to do this scarf in red. So that might be showing on the snowman here. And then all of this part here is going to be scarf too. So yeah, I think let's do that. So I'm going to grab my size 8 brush. And I'm going to lay some water down over everything. And I'm not going to worry about, you know, the nose or anything like that. I'm just going to wet the whole area. And I don't care if there's a little bit of blue in this brush. So that's why I'm just using this brush right now. But I just want to come through and wet this whole area. Again, just to give myself a little bit more time to come through and get some paint and some color in. And you know what? I might just take my kneaded eraser and just come along up here. I'm not worried about these lines because these are all going to be darker than what the lines are, but I kind of want this edge to disappear a little bit. So I am going to come in and I'm going to just get the paint over it a little bit, or the water over it a little bit, just so we can get like a soft edge there. Then again, I'm going over everything. All right, and let's grab some of this blue that we've got mixed up here. I can maybe make it a little bit more bluish. And I definitely want to add some water to this. I'm going to dab it off onto my paper towel just to see how it starts spreading. Yeah, actually, I think I want it to be a little darker. So a little bit more red into there, and it can be kind of like a purpley blue. Okay. So I'm getting this down here first. And you can see it's already starting to dry. And then I'm rinsing that brush off, dabbing it off. And I'm just going to come, and whatever paint is here, I'm just going to pull it. And I'm starting to create like a sphere where I want it to be darkest along the edge and then lightest here. And I'm just kind of pulling this paint along. I'm going to add just a little bit more dark back here. Again, dabbing that off really well. Okay, and I like that, so let's grab a little bit of red. That might be a little too much. Just going to tone that down right in here. And dab it off on my paper towel, and then let's drop a little bit of this down here. And I'm just dabbing off on my paper towel if I don't want as much color to come out. And then I'm just going to come back and kind of push this back with a damp brush. And I'm going to grab just a little darker red right at the bottom and just get this in. And just kind of let that flow into that other color that we have. And I'm dabbing my brush because I want the paint to kind of come out and spread a little bit. Okay. Now this is a little bit of a smaller area, so let's just go ahead and paint this in real quick. Oh, and I have a little bit of red on this brush. That's what I mean by you want to make sure your brushes are clean. But you know what? Maybe we can use that to our advantage, because there would be some red here, but I am trying to just scoop a little bit of that up. But this red is a very staining color. Okay, so I'm coming in with some clean water now. And then I'm going to grab some of this blue that I have over here, dab it off onto my paper towel, and start getting this in here. I'm going to rinse that off and dab my brush off so that I can kind of push this back a little bit here, because I still want some lighter areas, so especially along the edge. And then let's come in with our red mixture. I'm going to dab this off. Just a hint more of water if it's not flowing. I just dab the tips of my bristles in the water. Okay, I'm going to rinse that off. And then again, I'm going to come in with a very damp brush and just soften and push that back. I may even come in with some more of this blue and just really darken up a little bit. and then soften this hard edge. Okay, sorry about that. My device was going off, so I'm not going to say her name in case anybody else has a device nearby. But I just went ahead and dried this area. I didn't do anything else. So let's go ahead and mix up an orange. I think we'll work on his nose and then the scarf, and then we'll do our black areas last. So I'm going to grab my size 6 brush here. If you want to go down to a smaller size, you certainly can. But I'm going to take some yellow and just start mixing this into whatever red is down here. And actually I want it to be a little bit of a brighter color, so I'm just going to take a little bit of clean red and yellow, and I'm just going to mix it until I get a nice bright orange. And yes, my paints tend to get very dirty, but that's okay. That's the fun part. If you want to clean them easily, let them dry out, your pans, and then you can just take a wet brush and come over top of it and kind of swirl the colors out. But it doesn't really bother me too much, although I do like to have a clean palette. So there is that. I don't know what the difference is, but I think I like this, a nice bright orange. I'm going to grab a little bit of water. Actually, maybe I'll make it a little lighter. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just fill the little nose in. I'm trying to take my time because this is a smaller area. I don't have to work too fast. Now you can see where this color would pretty much go over the background anyway. I'm going to dab this off, and if I have any excess paint, I'm just going to dab this off because I want to be able to come in with a little touch of blue. And just darken this up. But I don't want to make green, so I'm going to add a little bit more red. And I just want a very dark orange. So if it's leaning towards the green side, add a little bit more red to kind of pull it out of that. And then I'm just adding yellow to just get back that brightness of it. I'm just going to start dabbing this in. Actually, I feel like I do want a little bit more blue just to make it a little bit more browny. And this is already starting to dry. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm just going to come in with this brush and soften this edge while I can. And we'll just go ahead and let this dry real quick. I'm going to dry it. And I was hoping I'd have time to drop some colors in, but that's okay. This is what we do when our paint is starting to dry faster than we can paint. So I'm going to get a little bit of water on this now because I don't need it to be very dry anymore. And I'm just going to come along and kind of focus this in the middle here a little bit. And then I'm going to come along with my other brush and just soften out these edges. I'm going to dab that off, come to the other side, and soften this out. Okay. And I feel like I want it to be a little bit brighter. So what I'm probably going to do is just let that dry again, or I'll dry it again, and I'm going to glaze a little bit of orange. I'm going to mix up a brighter orange, just coming in with a little bit of this blue, and I want to get this just right at the bottom here, just very watered down, but sort of like there's a shadow kind of going on. And we can kind of follow a little bit of like where our light source is coming. So I'm saying like here's the darkest. So you could kind of come through and get a bit of a shadow going. But I don't want this to be very stark, so I'm just going to dab that up. And I'm going to come in and just soften these edges really quick. Because I don't want this to be super harsh, just a bit of a shadow there. And then I've got a little bit of an orange color that kind of came around. Actually, I don't hate that. But this paper dries so quickly, you got to be really fast. Okay. Actually, I'm going to I have like a little hint of orange on my brush, and I'm going to kind of just get this over all of this to kind of have a little bit of a glow. I kind of like that. So instead of making it a mistake, I'm making it part of the painting now. And we're just going to have that kind of everywhere. But still a very subtle shadow here. You could make that a little darker if you wanted. Just cleaning up those edges, but I think I like that. So I'm going to call that done and go ahead and let everything dry again. Okay, so I want to mix up a brighter orange. So I'm going to come in and try to pick up just my yellow here. And I don't need a whole lot, but I do need a little dab of my red. And there, I like that. So we're just going to glaze this right over our nose. Actually, maybe I want to make it a little bit more like reddy dark orange, because I feel like that's kind of the same color that we have going on. If you go over the background, no big deal, just dab that off real quick. And then I'm just ever so slightly lightening up on this side a little bit. There, I think I like that. So let's go ahead and work on our scarf. And I want to use a red for this. So I'm going to grab some of my red. Nice bright red. I'm going to grab some water so we have it a little watered down. Now, because this dries so quickly, I'm probably going to do just one wash over everything, and then we'll come in and add some darker areas, and we can use our second brush to kind of fade those out a little bit. But I'm going to leave my lines here quite dark because these are some of the lines that are going to indicate some shadows, some folds within this. So since I'm doing one wash over this, I am just going to leave those here, but feel free to dab those out if you don't want them to be quite as bright. So I'm just grabbing some water here and we're just going to cover everything. Well, the scarf. Everything on the scarf. Oops. Trying to take my time and go fast at the same time. So you can see we can still see the graphite lines underneath, but our shadows are going to be quite dark. So I'm not too worried about those showing through. And you can see this is already all dry over here. So I'm just going to go ahead and just dry this really quick so it's all dry, and then we will just carry right on. So I'm going to mix up a little bit more red. And I'm going to grab some blue. I'm going to dab off whatever red's on my brush to make this a bit of a darker red. Now I still want this to be red, and I'm going to add just a touch of yellow into this. And a touch of blue again. So I want it almost purple, but just very dark. And then I'm going to bring that red back there. So we've got this very, very dark, almost like magenta type color. So let me just show you here a nice dark color. Now, what I'm going to do for this is get my darks in, and the darks might seem very dark, but that's okay because we're going to go back over with another layer of the red afterwards, and that'll kind of help tone down the darks a little bit. Now, if you like the way it looks with the layer that you did, if you did a little bit darker for the first layer, then just leave it this way. But I went a little bit lighter to make sure I can see my lines that I put in for the dark areas, and then I can go back over and do another layer of the red. So that's my plan. So I'm going to grab this brush that I can just use to kind of soften some of this out. And since this brush, I have this color on. So I'm just going to grab a little bit of water on my brush, and I'm going to start getting this in here. And then what I'm going to do is get this brush wet, dab it off onto my paper towel very well, and just come through. I'm going to try to soften these edges. This paper dries like so incredibly fast. This is kind of hard to do. And this is where our next layer coming in is going to make sense. So I'm going to actually add a little bit more water to my brush. This would be a little more watery than I would want it, but because it's drying so quickly, I need it to stay wet a little longer. Just going to drag this color down. Try to come in and just leave a bit of a light area here. So I'm just dabbing my brush off onto the paper towel, and I just keep coming through and just wiping this away. And of course now that area wants to stay wet. Okay, so this area is very dark. So I'm going to put this on the sides, and then I will come through and just let this fade into the middle area here. So I just want a little bit of a highlight in the middle there. And I'm going to come back here where this is starting to move again. Just going to get a little bit here. Okay. So again, don't worry if it's not perfect. This is our sort of like under painting shadows. Okay, we've got a bit of a dark area here. And if these two areas bleed together, that's okay because they're both pretty dark. But I am going to try to get a little highlight right on the edge here, just to kind of separate them a little bit. Then we've got dark area coming in here, kind of fades out. very dark area here, so I'm just going to get that in. Again, just rinsing off if I'm not feathering that edge out and I'm just picking up more paint. And I'm actually going to dab a little bit of this off. Just come around here a little bit. Fade that out. I'm going to do the same here. I'm just looking to kind of see where I need to add a little bit more just to create some folds in this, and I want to darken up here a little bit more. Okay, I think that's good. So I'm going to rinse this brush out. And we're just going to do a layer of our red right over this. So I'm just going to grab this red. And I'm going to get a really nice bright red color. And this is just going to help those shadows come into place. And this is pretty dry enough to go right over it because we're just going to do one little layer over it. Now, if you start doing this and your shadows aren't popping through, like if your color's a little bit too dark and your shadows weren't dark enough, just grab some water and thin it out a little bit. But we're just going to glaze this color right over, and this is going to make sense. This is another technique that I like to use, especially if you're having a really hard time getting your shadow colors right. Just lay down a base color And then you can always glaze over top of it.
Now I don't want to scrub too much, but if you do a very thin layer for the base color, even if you end up scrubbing a little bit too much, it doesn't lift off. But if we went and did a very thick layer like this at first, then that color would most likely lift off as we're putting our shadows in. And because I want some of the shadows to have our hard edges, that's why I'm not doing it wet on wet. Now I'm just going to come back over everything just really quickly. I want everything to stay wet for a second. So I can come and just pick up a little bit of this paint and just create a few lighter areas. So I'm just dabbing this on the paper towel. And if you're not picking up color, just wipe your brush off or rinse it off. Okay, but this is really starting to dry fast, so I don't really have much more time to grab any shadows, but I think that's pretty good. I want to get this edge a little bit. Just going to put a little bit more paint back in there where I took a little bit too much off. So I think I quite like that. So let's go ahead and start working on our dark areas. Okay, so since we have this lovely dark red pile here, I'm going to use this as my base to mix up my black for our black areas. But if you don't have this, just mix your red and your blue, make a very dark purple, add a little bit of yellow to it, just to like desaturate that purple. So that's what I'm going to do. I need to get some water here. So I'm going to make a purple, and I want it to be very dark. So choose a dark blue and a dark red for this. I'm just going to rinse this brush off so I'm not getting my yellow any dirtier. I'm just going to grab some of my yellow right in here. And this is just going to desaturate it. And if it's going a little bit green, just add a little bit of red to it. And we've got this really pretty black, and I'm just going to pull some of this blue and red in there. So it's sort of like a very dark purpley black color. So let's go ahead, and we've got little whites in the eyes. I don't know if I'm going to put that in my painting, just because he's not really alive, and these are supposed to be little pieces of coal. I guess if you wanted him to be alive, you could add little whites, and don't worry about if these are not perfectly round, because they are like little pieces of coal. I think it's like buttons or something in the reference photo. But I'm going to call them coal, because I think that's what they were originally, or rocks, I guess, maybe. I don't know, that might look a little creepy with just with just black eyes like that. So maybe I will add a little dot of white in there. Oh, and we got to come and add a little bit. So let's get this button down here then, or whatever this is, with this color. And I forgot to add his little like blushies. And I'm just going to come wipe this off. I'm just going to create a subtle little highlight. So I'm just picking up whatever paint on my brush, just creating a little subtle highlight on the right hand side of these. Just wiping off on the paper towel. And while it's still wet, you're going to need to come back and kind of keep picking some up. Oh, let's see if I can grab this little bit here. Gotta find a clean spot on my Kleenex. Actually, we can come in with that scrubber brush and kind of do that. So I'm not going to worry too much about that. I'm going to dab off some water, and I'm going to just get a little darker back on this side here. Okay. Okay, so I think I like that. So let's go ahead and get a little bit of blush in. So I'm going to rinse with this big brush off really well. And then I'm just going to grab a little bit of water, and I'm just going to wet this area right here. You don't have to add this in, but I think it does add a little bit of something. I'm going to grab a little bit of this red, some water, dab it off onto my paper towel, and I'm just going to find the center of it and just dab this in. Just like that. Rinse that off, and then I'm just going to come and soften the edge, because I don't want those little marks coming around. I want this to be very soft, so I'm just going to dab this off and just come in and soften these edges. Okay, so I like that. So let's go ahead and dry that real quick so we can do the rest of our little coal areas. All right, so I'm just going to come right back with this mixture, a little bit of water just for flow, and dab it off. Now, if you need to use a smaller brush, go ahead and do that, because these are some very small areas, but I'm going to try to stick with this size 4 brush. I think this is this is a 6. And every brush is slightly different, so your 6 might be different than my 6. So just use whatever brush you need to. But again, I'm not worried about making these perfect little circles. These are little dark rocks or coal or whatever you want them to be. But I want them to start getting a little bit bigger, ish. I guess I could make this one a little bit bigger as we start getting towards the middle of his face, and then they're getting smaller, smaller until they're just like little dots. So try not to make them all the same size. I want some of these just to be little dots. There we go. I like that because of perspective. Things are getting further away from us, so they're going to be a little smaller. All right, so let's come in and do the hat. And how I'm going to do this, I think I'm going to wet this area, but I'm going to wet down a little bit further, again, because I want this to kind of blend in with the head a little bit. I don't know. I guess we could always come and soften this out if we need to. But I'm going to come and just mix up a little bit more. And again, I'm keeping everything a little bit more on the blue side, so I'm just adding a touch more blue to that. Grabbing some water. And yeah, let's just paint. Let's just paint this in with this. I think I am going to do some water just so I have a little bit of time, because I do want to like lift a little bit of a highlight kind of around the rim of the hat, just to show the difference between the top and the bottom. And if this is dirty water, that's fine, because this is going to cover it up. Because my clean water is getting a little dirty at this point, but it's okay. And I don't have to be too precious around this edge, because I can come in and get that with the paint. Okay. So let's just come in and get this color in. Okay, so I'm going to take this bigger brush and just soften this edge out. And just kind of coax this paint down a little farther here. So I'm just trying to come in around the eye. Okay, and then I'm just going to use my big brush, rinse this off really well, dab it off onto some Kleenex or some paper towel, and I'm just going to try to come along the rim of this hat. And just create a bit of a highlight. Then I might even come along this edge here and just softly pick up some paint. Just using this color to fill in this little area here. Okay, let's come back with our smaller brush, and I'm coming underneath of that area where I lifted some of the color, and I'm just gonna get a little bit more back in. Just dabbing this off. And I'm just gonna come in and make this a little darker. So I added a little bit of water there. And then as long as I keep all of this area kind of the same wetness, I can come back in and re-wet. And I think that's good. I think. Okay, I think that's hands-off time. Things are drying. So if we want to come back and make any touch-ups after, we can. Okay, so now that it's dried, it's a little bit lighter than what I'd like. So I think I'm just going to come back in and darken this area and maybe just under here. So I'm going to mix up this black that we were using, and I think I'm going to need a little bit more. So we're getting lots of mixing practice here. So again, I'm adding blue, I'm adding red, a little bit more blue to get it on the purple side. And then just a touch of yellow. Oh, that might have been too much yellow. So again, if we're getting green, add red back, because red is the opposite of green. And blue. Need some water. And there we're getting that nice dark mixture, and now just a hint of yellow. Okay, this is a very nice dark color, liking that. I need a little bit of water. So I'm going to put this in, and then I'm going to use my bigger brush to kind of soften those edges out, but I want to try to keep the highlight areas that we got in. So again, just enough water so I get a good flow. And I'm going to go about halfway. And then I'll grab some water on my brush, dab it off, and just start letting this paint kind of fade and pull over here. And just add a little bit more of this, because this paint really doesn't move that well on this paper. So I kind of have to manually manipulate it a little bit. There, I like that. A nice fade there. So we've still got our bright highlight. And I'm going to come underneath and kind of do the same thing. But I'm going to try to get a little bit of a harsh edge underneath of our highlight and then fade it out over here. And I'm going to fade it underneath onto our snowman. So I'm going to start getting this color in. And I'm just grabbing some water and letting this color fade down. And then I'm going to grab some more water and just let this area kind of fade out. I'm just switching back between the brush that has paint on it and my brush that I'm using to soften this area out, just depending how dark or soft I want this to be. And I think I like that, but now I feel like the rim is a little too light. So I'm just going to water this down and just glaze some color right over this. I'm going to dab that off on my paper towel and just glaze a little bit of color right over this, so it's still lighter, but just not quite as light as that. I may still leave a bit lighter area here. I don't know, actually I think I want it to be darker and maybe kind of connect and then just kind of fade out. Just getting rid of that harsh edge again. Whoops, I did not mean to do that. A little too dark there. Let's just come in and try to get rid of some of that there. that harsh edge. And now we're actually pulling some from the eye. Okay, I think we fixed that. And then I'm just going to quickly soften this out, and then I think I'm going to call this good because I'm at that stage where I'm just fiddling with things. But I feel like that looks pretty good. Now to combat this little oopsie, I'm actually going to just wet this area. I'm going to grab a little bit of red. I'm going to drop some more of this in and just create a bit of a darker blushy on this guy. Again, dab my brush off, and I'm just going to lightly dab around some of the edges. But because we've got some dark areas going on, it's kind of creating some issues because the paint's wanting to lift very easily. But I just want to come right in here and just get rid of this harsh line. And I think that's good. I think I'm going to call this done. I say that, and then I'm going to clean these edges up here. And just here where some of the paint kind of got scrubbed out a little bit. Actually, that one is going to spread. Okay. There, and I don't think I need to add the little white areas to the eyes because I was able to kind of keep some light in there. But if you want to add white to the eyes, you certainly go right ahead. But I think I'm going to call this guy done. I really love how this turned out. So I hope you kind of enjoyed the techniques. I'm trying to use some different techniques with each card. So you kind of learn some stuff along the way that you can transfer into other paintings. But I really love how this came out with the background. So I figured we'd take the tape off together. Now I go ahead and let this dry. I've just got this on a board. This is like a back of a watercolor pad here, and I just tape it down to this, and I let it fully dry for about a day or so that it will flatten out as much as possible. So let's just go ahead and take the tape off. Now I always pull away from my artwork because if it's going to rip, I don't want it to rip in, I want it to rip away. But this paper, these cards actually do fairly well. I haven't had any rip on me yet. Actually, the tape's ripping though, but it hasn't ripped the paper. So let's go ahead and do this side. Ooh, and a little bit where I got it super wet, kind of went underneath of the tape, but that's okay. You could always come over top with some white gouache or white acrylic or whatever and fix those edges. But again, I kind of don't mind so much. This is just a fun little card, but I really love how this guy turned out. And you can see my drawing. I did take my drawing to the very edges, but you can just come back in with whatever eraser you have and just erase these areas here. Because I wasn't sure how far I wanted to go with the tape, so I always kind of draw a little bit more than I need to right to the edges. And you can see this came out fairly flat for a cheap card, and I used quite a bit of water, especially in the background, and I went over a lot of these areas a couple of times. So this is pretty flat, and then it comes pre-scored, so you can just fold it right up. But I'm going to leave it flat for another little bit. But I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Let me know if you're painting along down below in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next video. Bye!